Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. My name's Mike. I've been the lead organizer for this event, so I'm just going to give, just for a couple of minutes, I'm going to be doing some just general housekeeping before I hand you over to our President and Vice Chancellor, Duncan Iverson. So, can I ask you to put your mobile phones on silent, because we want to hear what our speakers have to say, and if the phones go off, it disturbs. So could you please put them on silent? Or even better, just turn them off. That would be very helpful. Can I also point out there are no fire alarms expected this evening, but if you hear one, leave the building via the way you came in and make your way to the old quadrangle. So basically you come out of the building, you turn left, and then you go through the arch, and that's where you're supposed to await further instructions. Okay? If you need the loo, we've got toilets, ladies over there, we've got ladies down the stairs behind the registration desk, and we've got gents and ladies on the Whitworth corridor as well. So there's plenty of loos if you need them. What else? Oh yes, can I remind you that the debate is being filmed? So, and it will actually be available on the university website, hopefully next week. So that's that. And finally, if you've got any queries, then there are a number of stewards around, and they're wearing these badges. It says, "Ask me." So if you have any, you're lost, which is not very likely, just go up to a steward and ask them, and they will direct you or help you in any way. Okay, so without further ado, I will hand over to Duncan Iverson. Thanks very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Duncan Iverson. I'm the President and Vice Chancellor here at the University of Manchester. And welcome to our second Whitworth debate. And the mission of the Whitworth debate, aligned very closely with the mission of the university, is to provide a context in which we can air difficult and often divisive issues in a way that promotes understanding. Understanding of different points of view in an open and spirit of civil and open discussion. And it follows on from a debate we had last year around this time on animal research. Now, this is also part of a wider series of events that we're instituting across the university this year to promote debate about difficult and important issues. And that includes meetings like this, but also meetings with students and staff in new ways and new formats. And we really embrace the opportunity to give our students, our staff, and the wider community a chance to be exposed to different ideas and beliefs so that they can come to their own conclusions about what they think and how they should think about them. Now tonight, as we'll hear in a minute, our speakers are members of the Jewish and Muslim communities and have expressed differing opinions of various aspects of the discussion we'll hear tonight. And we recognize that not all members of these communities, obviously, will share the same views. This is a dialogue across different views. But also, we know that the conflict in the Middle East is of great concern to our university community, as it is to the broader community, and particularly for those with friends, family, or close ties to the region. And we express our deep sympathy for all those affected by this deep, ongoing, terrible conflict. But I have to say, in these difficult times, when emotions are understandably running very high, it's never been more important to maintain our values of mutual understanding and tolerance towards each other, even when, maybe even especially when, it feels so hard to do so. Our speakers may well disagree, and you will undoubtedly disagree with many aspects of what they have to say. But they've come here, and we appreciate it enormously, in the spirit, with the aim of discussing these issues in the hope that we may foster an atmosphere of mutual understanding. Understanding is the key. So the discussion tonight is not about trying to force anyone on whatever side you see yourself on to change your mind. It's about understanding each other, understanding why we think the way we do in that best Socratic tradition. Now, just to to bring things to a bit of a close, one of the most important foundational values of a university is that of academic freedom. It's a moral and legal right that sits at the heart of everything we do. And as a truth-seeking institution, our staff and students require the freedom to pursue questions wherever they lead in a lawful and a respectful way. But another important value at the heart of our university is inclusion. And freedom and inclusion are two sides of our core academic mission. So in addition to freedom, we also need to be a genuinely inclusive institution, because we have no hope of getting at the truth of things if we're not including as wide a range of perspectives as we can. Now, these two values can be in tension. They can indeed conflict, but I believe strongly that they're fundamentally interdependent, and it's part of our obligation, I believe, as a university, to keep them from falling apart. Now, the Middle East is a subject about which people feel very strongly on all sides, and in the spirit of open debate, I urge you tonight to allow our speakers to make their points without undue disruption, without interference, that in any way would deny us from achieving what we're here to do tonight, which is to listen and to hear what people have to say. You know, the world is full of shouting at the moment, and the loudest are certainly being heard. But let's endeavor to take a different approach. You know, sometimes the most radical thing we can do for another human being is to listen to them. And let's hope we can act in that radical spirit this evening. So now let me introduce the panel. Very pleased to invite, to welcome Rafi Bloom, who is one of the founders and co-chair of the Northwest Friends of Israel, which was formed in 2014 and is one of the largest grassroots Israel advocacy organizations in the UK. Rafi holds both professional and voluntary roles within the UK Jewish community. He describes himself as a proud Zionist and a passionate and knowledgeable advocate for Israel, and often appears in the UK media to both put across Israel's case and to give a perspective on anti-Semitism faced by the Jewish community. Alongside this, Rafi works extensively with the Manchester-based Holocaust survivors to ensure their stories and the lessons of the Holocaust are widely shared, especially with high school students and young adults. Abdullah Al Andalusi is an international speaker, thinker, and intellectual activist for Islam and Muslim affairs. He's a researcher for the I3 Institute, an instructor and head of the Department of Occidentology at the Quran Institute, and in 2009 co-founded the discussion forum, the Muslim Debate Initiative, a forum that promotes open dialogue and critical debate between thinkers, academics, politicians, and public speakers of all backgrounds. He's spoken in community centers, universities, colleges, made numerous appearances on various programs, on TV and radio channels, including the BBC, ITV, BBC Arabic, BBC Radio 4, Channel 4, Al Jazeera, and the Islam Channel. And then finally to our moderator, our chair, Joseph Timmon, who is a politics writer at the Manchester Evening News. He's worked at the MEN for 4 years and has been leading the newspaper's political coverage since October this year. So with that, I'll hand over to Joseph for the beginning of tonight's event. Thank you.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Yeah. So now we're just about to get started. It's just time for me to explain how this evening will work. Our two speakers will begin with opening statements. Rafi will posit the question, is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism? And Abdullah will respond. That will then be followed by one longer rebuttal each and 5 shorter rebuttals each. The second half of the debate will consist of a question and answer session. Then our speakers will each have 5 minutes for their final remarks. And just a reminder, tonight's speakers are members of the Jewish and Muslim communities, but they and we recognize that a diversity of views exist across these and other communities, and the speakers tonight are representing their own personal viewpoints. So Rafi, over to you.
When people criticize Zionists, they mean Jews, and you're talking anti-Semitism. Who said this? It wasn't Herzl, it wasn't the chief rabbi, it wasn't Ben-Gurion, it was Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. And that criticism, as we know, takes the form of statements such as, Zionism is only a modern-day political movement. Zionism is different to Judaism. Israel is a settler colonial state, and of course, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And we hear these arguments all the time from those who seek to delegitimize the state of Israel, and in many cases seek its destruction. And no doubt we'll hear them tonight. Yes, the founding of the state of Israel was the result of Zionism as a modern-day political movement. But those who seek to characterize Zionism as only political and differentiate it from Judaism and Jews are at best woefully uneducated, or at worst, dangerously disingenuous. Let me quote Alice Marcoux, whose family survived the Holocaust and communist Romania. Judaism is a native identity. Jews are a people and a religion. Like many other indigenous identities, it predates the modern separation of religion, culture, mythology, morals, nation, and land. These elements have all been tied together for Jews over the course of millennia. Much like other native identities, Judaism sanctifies, which means the religious element, the bond between the people, the nation, and the place where their ancestors had lived, the land, and had formed their native heritage, their culture, mythology, morals, language, and so on. In other words, much like many people can accept Native American tribes, seeing their ancestral land as sacred, a belief that isn't nullified even when they have been displaced from it, that's how these same people should understand the unbreakable, holy, indigenous connection in Jewish identity between the people of Israel and Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. She finishes by saying, it might be that only in modern times we came to refer to this bond as Zionism, when it took on the form of a political movement. But it has always been there, a constant Jewish longing, an intrinsic part of our faith, history, and legacy. And I know, as do most Jews, whether they're religious or not, that this yearning for a return to self-determination in our ancestral homeland is brought to the fore time and time again. Anyone who has been in synagogue at the end of Yom Kippur will know that Jews joyfully declare, next year in Jerusalem. It's a powerful, emotional, and heartfelt cry made before God on the holiest day of the Jewish year. And similarly, everyone participating in the Passover Seder makes the same declaration. Judaism is unique in its attachment to Jerusalem. The Tanakh, the complete Old Testament, mentions Jerusalem more than 650 times. The Quran does not mention it once. Psalm 137:5 declares, "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand lose its skill." There's no comparable expression in non-Jewish scripture. And that declaration is made at the end of every Jewish wedding ceremony to express our grieving for the destruction of the temple and remember Jerusalem, even at moments of extreme joy like a wedding. In Judaism, Jerusalem is a living focus of prayer. When praying, one is required to orient our heart and face towards Jerusalem, no matter where we are in the world. References to Zion, the land of Israel, and Jerusalem are deeply embedded in ancient Jewish texts, including the Bible, the prophetic books, the Talmud, and the Siddur, the Jewish prayer book. Archaeological evidence further substantiates the long-standing Jewish presence in the land of Israel. And a close examination of Jewish liturgy reveals a profound connection between the Jewish people and their ancestral land. Jews are traditionally called to formal worship 3 times a day. These prayers are compiled in the Siddur, and many of them reference Zion and are expressly devoted to the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Additional prayers are recited before and after meals, as well as on special occasions, on holidays, and whilst mourning. And through the study of these prayers, whether in the home or synagogue, one can discern both the physical and spiritual significance of Zion. The Hebrew calendar and Jewish holidays are based on the agricultural year as experienced specifically in the land of Israel. And among the 613 Jewish mitzvot, biblical decrees that Jews are required to observe, there are 26 decrees that can only be observed while living in the land of Israel. And many Jewish festivals explicitly celebrate Zionist ideas, meaning they uphold the importance of the bond between the Jews and the land of Israel. Hanukkah is a celebration of native Jews, the Maccabees, fighting off the forces of the Greek occupiers and re-establishing Jewish sovereignty in Israel. And to bring this full circle to modern-day Zionism at the end of the 19th century, when the secular Theodor Herzl wrote The Jewish State, he forged an alliance with religious Jews worldwide who had longed for Zion much longer than he had. For them, it was not political, it was sacred. The poster, designed for the Fifth Zionist Congress in Basel in 1901, had written across the bottom the prayer, "May our eyes see thy return to Zion in mercy." 10th century Portuguese did not pray to return to Brazil, nor did our own British countrymen yearn for Australia. There were colonial powers in Israel, that's without doubt. Egypt, Babylonia, Persia, Greece, Rome, Islamic Ottoman Turks, Jordan, and of course Britain. But the Jews were not among them. Jews absolutely cannot be a settler colonial power in the land where they arose. And for all the violence Israel has been forced to endure in defending itself since 1948, its national anthem is not about rockets and bombs like America's. It's about hope, the hope of 2,000 years to be once again a free people in our land, the land of Zion, Jerusalem, Liot am chofshi be'artzenu eretz Sion v'Yerushalayim. The modern-day state of Israel, founded by modern-day Zionists, is simply the rightful fulfillment of this. Judaism includes Zionism, which is derived from the Hebrew word Sion. To deny that intimate link between Judaism, Jerusalem, and the land of Israel that has existed for millennia and has been proven in black and white here is to deny one of the most fundamental tenets of Judaism. This is thousands of years of Jewish religion meeting the modern to re-establish a Jewish state in our ancestral home. We are a people and a religion. Hate and disagree with the things that Israeli government does. But if you call for the destruction of the Jewish state of Israel with your anti-Zionism, then you hate Judaism and Jews, and that is what makes anti-Zionism anti-Semitism.
I'd like to thank you all for being here. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I want to make some points. Firstly, in case you can't tell, the Muslim here, so the person that's a Muslim is also wearing a kippah with a beard and a shirt. But that's in no way, I'm trying to actually destroy stereotypes here. So Muslims can look like that too. Okay. Just quickly what you said, a few points which are inaccurate. The Quran does mention the Holy Land is called Al-Ard al-Muqaddis, the Holy Land, or Al-Aqsa, the furthest mosque. So referring to what some people call the Temple Mount, or what we call Al-Aqsa Masjid. He said that Jews have a religious connection to the land, or to Jerusalem more specifically, to be honest. And, Sikhs have a spiritual connection to Amritsar. It doesn't mean they have to rule that land and take it over and what have you, right? So they can still have your temple. The Baha'is in the state of Israel, quote unquote, have their HQ there, their head temple there, but they're not going to come and invade it and try to take it over. There's a difference. Okay, now for my speech. Oh, and by the way, Theodor Herzl was equally happy with Argentina. He didn't really care about a holy land, but that's a side point. Okay, in 1917, the anti-Semitic UK government cabinet believed that they could use Jews to win the war against Germans and promised the Zionists to grant Jews Palestine as a national home, but not expressly as a state, on condition that the civil rights of the inhabitants be respected. Despite promising in a joint French declaration that all the former peoples of the Ottoman Caliphate would be given self-determination, they expressly denied this for the Palestinians and promptly allowed the drastic changing of demographics within Palestine with European immigrants without the consent of the people there. This state was called the Mandate of Palestine. Zionism demands a Jewish state and a democracy, but you can't have both when the majority of the population isn't Jewish. So what are you going to do if you hold Zionism to be absolute above all other considerations? Well, you do the following. In 1947, the UK was reaching the end of the mandate, but Palestine still had a 2/3 majority non-Jewish Arab Palestinian population. Zionists refused repeated proposals for a unitary democratic state. The Zionists noticed that despite the UN partition, 40% of their state would still be non-Jewish Palestinian Arab. So the Zionist leadership, together with the militia, in coordination with a declared terrorist organization, the Irgun, began an ethnic cleansing campaign in Palestine, kicking out 700,000 Palestinians. The Irgun committed massacres like Deir Yassin, killing almost over 100 people, Arab villagers, and reportedly parading captives through West Jerusalem before they were reportedly executed. Later, the leader of the Irgun, Menachem Begin, was arrested and prosecuted for war crimes in Israel. Only joking, he was made the 6th Prime Minister of Israel. The Palestinians that were left in Israel, now were less than half their number, were put under discriminatory military rule for 19 years. Only them, not their Jewish co-citizens. The expelled refugees weren't allowed to return because of demographics, and their homes and lands were taken. So much for their protected civil rights under the Balfour Declaration. This only fully changed when Israel launched a war in 1967, conquering Gaza, the West Bank, and Golan, and Israel now had 1 million more Palestinians to deal with. Israel wanted land, but not the Palestinians. In 2024, it has now been 71 years that they have been under military rule. Why are they so antsy about it? Indeed, Israel is quite the exceptional state, being the world record holder for applying martial law and military occupation in modern times, notably without international sanctions. South Africa got that for less. Apartheid South Africa, that is. But what is gained by injustice requires more injustice to keep. So despite international scrutiny, Israel uses disproportionate suppression tactics on the Palestinians, like mass damage operations on population centers deemed to be loosely connected or sympathetic to Palestinian insurgency. We see Israeli commanders talking about operations that killed masses of civilians, quote unquote, as an example for everyone, and quote unquote, or they were ordered to maximal killing and damage to property, end quote. In the West Bank, Israel made military laws that silenced peaceful criticism of Israel, even showing the Palestinian flag, and pursuing a policy of housing dispossession, military harassment via checkpoints, and home invasions, and even permitting settler harassment and terror designed to corral Palestinians into reservations, or South African Bantustans, if you will, or just making life uncomfortable for Palestinians to encourage them to leave. However, the world was watching, and Israel was losing support. So this is why Israel's foreign minister, Abba Egan, in 1973 said one of the chief tasks of dialogue with the Gentile world was to show that the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is not a distinction at all. Despite leading figures within the Palestinian rights movement and activists being Jews, this label is often used to silence criticism of what is the big elephant in the room. Now, an Israeli minister said, he talked about Arab demography as a problem. He said, there is a danger we shall be Arabicized. He said, self-determination is not an absolute right. The absurdity of Arab nationalism is that it demands 100% self-determination, saying that all Arabs, wherever they are, must live under their sovereign flags. If we decide on a unitary state that will have to be free, with free and equal rights, whatever you say of that society, it will not be Jewish. Who said this? Abba Egan. And he said it in the exact same article. He said that anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism. He said we must convince the world that anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism, as anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and at the same time, he says, and we must deny self-determination to the Arabs. And because Zionism demands that. Now, you don't have to be Einstein to see the problem here, but if you need him, he said, it seems to me a matter for simple common sense that we cannot ask to be given rule over Palestine where 2/3 of the population are not Jewish. Is he an anti-Semite? I'd like to see him answer that, actually. Einstein? I'd like to ask my interlocutor and fellow Zionist advocates, thank you, if you must insist on continuing to campaign against justice, against Palestinian equality, against Palestinian right to human dignity, equal self-determination, and an end to the suffering and death toll that is the price Zionism has exacted, at least do us the favor of not insulting our intelligence with the ridiculous notion that campaigning for these is anti-Semitic. If you are saying that equality, human rights, and justice are anti-Semitic, and therefore against Jewishness, then you, sir, are the anti-Semites. Thank you.
Okay, now each of you are going to have 4 minutes each in the first rebuttal, starting with Rafi, and I am going to be stricter with time this time.
Thank you. Sorry, is that mic on? Yes, good. I noticed that Abdullah didn't answer the point about Jerusalem. He mentioned Al-Aqsa, but not Jerusalem. And he virtually ignored completely the chronicle of examples I gave of the Jewish connection to the land. We are the only indigenous people that have ever had an unbroken bond to that land. But let's deal with just one lie that we heard tonight, and that's about the War of Independence and expulsion and massacres. In 1947, when the League of Nations decided to impose partition, the Palestinian, or I should say at the time, the Arab occupants of the land started a civil war against the Jews, which was attempted to be put down by the British. Now, there's often this misrepresentation about there being expulsion. And often they talk about Plan D, Plan Dalet, which was the Haganah's plan, as this mass plan for expulsion. Let me just say very clearly, the Israeli government at the time, the Israeli leadership at the time, had absolutely no plan for expulsion, and I'll prove it. Plan Dalet, which was enacted on the 10th of March 1948, says the following: the objective of this plan is to gain control of areas of the Hebrew state and defend its borders. It also aims at gaining control of the areas of Jewish settlement and concentration, the areas of Jewish settlement which are located outside the border, which would have been in the new Palestinian state. It doesn't talk about mass expulsions anywhere. There is some mention of where a town that might be a danger behind enemy lines is conquered, then the residents are expelled. But there is absolutely no overall overarching plan to expel Palestinians. And I'll tell you I'll just go into that in a bit more detail. The Commander-in-Chief, Israel Galili of the Haganah, said that on the Arab policy of the Zionist movement is an acknowledgement of the full rights, needs, and freedoms of the Arabs in the Hebrew state without any discrimination and desire for coexistence on the basis of mutual freedom and dignity. In other words, we respect the rights of the Arabs who are going to live in our state, and we don't mistreat them. And Tom Segev, who's one of the new Israeli historians who wrote a comprehensive biography of Ben-Gurion, said, "What is important for me to point out is to say that before the War of Independence, Palestinians left, Palestinians escaped, Palestinians were forced to escape. In the beginning, it was the Palestinian elite that left, the rich people left. Then people left because of war, they left because of propaganda, they left because they were told to leave. There was absolutely no clear plan of expulsion, and it's a lie that's propagated time and time again to say that Israel expelled 750 Palestinians. If they had this plan of expulsion, why is today 20% of Israel, 2 million people, Arab Israelis? But let me just quote you 2 or 3 more things. Emil Guri, the secretary of the Palestinian Arab Higher Committee, said on September the 6th, 1948, "The fact that there are refugees is the direct consequence of the act of the Arab states in opposing partition in the Jewish state. The Arab states agreed upon this policy unanimously, and they must share in the solution of the problem." And Abu Mazen, the president of the Palestinian Authority, said in 1976, "The Arab states succeeded in scattering the Palestinian people and in destroying their unity. They did not recognize them as a unified people until the states of the world did so, and that is regrettable." And lastly, Edward Atiyah, the secretary of the Arab League, said in 1955, "The wholesale exodus of Palestinians was due partly to the belief of the Arabs, encouraged by the boasting of an unrealistic press and the irresponsible utterances of some of the Arab leaders that it could only be a matter of some weeks before the Jews were defeated by the armies of the Arab states and the Palestinian Arabs enabled to re-enter and retake possession of their country. There was no expulsion. It's a lie to delegitimize Israel, and you've just heard the proof."
Ready?
Okay. So what I've encountered when I studied Zionist interlocutors is they will selectively quote and miss out a whole bunch of stuff. So they said he misdirected you, made you think that the accusation is there was a dedicated plan, which was Plan Dalet, which came a bit afterwards, and it was actually very broad in how it was worded, so anything could be considered to be an enemy population center that must be removed and relocated. But what actually happened was that when the partition plan occurred, Ben-Gurion is on record saying that how can we have a Jewish state with 40% Arabs? It's not possible, right? And then he told all his commanders this, and then his commanders basically went around and expelled Palestinians from a number of cities, and Ben-Gurion didn't stop this. And in fact, in one case, he even ordered it, not two cases, in Ramla and Lidda. He's on record as ordering. He said, when asked what should we do with the Arab population, he said there's two accounts of the minutes of that meeting. One is he waved his hand, other one is he said expel them, right? So, and that's 10% of the population of the Palestinians. That was 70,000 people. That's on record there. Now, if Israel is so concerned about letting the truth out, and it declassified documentation, which has led to historians like Benny Morris, who is a Zionist, by the way, documenting this is where we have all this evidence coming from, of military accounts by the Haganah, by the Jewish agency. It's their own military accounts of their own commanders, what happened. You can't say it's made up by Palestinians, right? What did Israel do in response when all this came out? All this declassified material came out, and it got reported on and written about, and became popularized. They reclassified it again. Oops, let's cover it up. So now you can't go back and read those documents, those proofs anymore. If Israel is so concerned of proving that there was no ethnic cleansing, why is it reclassifying those documents? Answer that question. Why is it reclassifying those documents? Why not let the truth be out for everyone to see? Or have more time? Yeah, okay, I'll go ahead. All right. Oh yes, there's something else he said that was actually inaccurate. He also said that the Arabs responded to the UN partition by an uprising, and the British helped suppress it. I think you're talking about the Arab revolt that happened 10 years prior to that against British occupation. But hey, they weren't the only people fighting against British occupation. So were the Irgun and many others. Now, the point being is what actually happened was that the Arab High Council, so what you could call some kind of leadership of the Palestinians, what was their response to the UN partition that gave them around 44% or 45% of their own land? What was their response? A peaceful 3-day strike. When was the first military operations by the Haganah initiated? It wasn't initiated after the Arab armies were coming. It was initiated as the Arab armies were coming. It was initiated within 1 month of the partition plan being announced. And they didn't just stop at securing the Jewish partition areas. They went into the Galilee that was meant to be part of the Arab partition areas. They actively conquered. This is a matter of historical record, sir. There's no denying this. I don't know even why. I don't even need to quote anything. It's just you can check it for yourself. I actually want you to check it for yourself. And this is how he misrepresents the argument. The Zionist agency were the aggressors. They went into the Arab partition. The Arab High Commission simply its only response was a peaceful strike. And it was met with a military strike by the Zionists. And that's ethnic cleansing. It's on record. And if you want, I can give quotations later on, but I think I'll leave it there.
So let's talk about Benny Morris, shall we, since he was quoted. Benny Morris said the following, and I'll quote him because I think it's important to get the truth. I would say that altogether during the 1948 war, which lasted from the end of 47 to the beginning of 1949, around 800 to 900 Arab civilians or prisoners of war were deliberately killed in massacres when you take all of the various 20 or so incidents. I would also say that between 200 and 300 Jews were massacred by Arabs in the course of the war. He goes on to say, Benny Morris, that was just quoted, the war was begun by the Arabs. They were the ones who launched aggression. They were the ones who killed many, many Jews in the course of the war. 6,000 Jews were killed by the Arabs, or 1% of the Israeli population. 1%, by the way, of Americans dead today would be 3 million. He goes on to say there were very few massacres in the war compared to the civil wars. And he said, by and large, the Jews, there is no other way of saying it, behaved well in the 1948 war, given the circumstances of Arab attack and fear of a Holocaust at Arab hands. The quality and quantity of massacres were very small by comparison to other civil conflicts. This is Benny Morris that was just quoted as being the one to say the Jews did terrible things. So that's number one. So again, let's look for the truth. But what's interesting here is that when partition was offered, let's get to the nub of the issue here. When partition was offered, what happened? The Jews said yes, 55% of the land. The Arabs, who weren't Palestinians, the Arabs, said 45%. And this is a pattern that has repeated itself again and again and again across history. Every time the Palestinians have been offered sovereignty of their own next to a sovereign state of the Jews, every single time they have said no and no and no. They have always wanted all or nothing. And this still happens to modern times today. So what happened in 1947-48 was they said no, there was a war, the Jews fought, the Jews won. Yes, there were atrocities on both sides. It's important to say that. Not everything that the Haganah and the Irgun and the Stern Gang did was correct. But Benny Morris, one of these new historians that is widely quoted, and Tom Segev, another of these new historians, have both said categorically in black and white that there was no overall plan to expel it. You can say broad things like, well, there wasn't a plan, but they sort of knew about it. You can't prove it, though, can you? And there wasn't. And the fact that between 100 and 160,000 Arabs remained in Israel after the War of Independence, who've now become 2 million Arabs in the Israeli state today, proves that there was no overall plan of expulsion. If there was, there wouldn't be one Arab in the state of Israel today.
Yeah, Benny Morris also said that inbuilt into Zionism from the very beginning was the idea of transfer of the Arabs out of the land. So he's not quoting him there. He's also not quoting Ben Gurion, who said in a letter to his own son, Amos, 10 years prior to it, that what happens if there's a partition and there are parts of Palestine which obviously are going to be Arab? What's going to happen? So he was asked about this, and he basically responded that he will make a deal with the Arabs to see if they can allow migration of European immigrants into the Arab areas as much as they want. If the Arabs say no to this, and he says, if they say to him, we want neither your honey nor your sting, then we said, then we have to talk to them in a different language. And it will be a different language because we will have a state. And he talked about the use of weapons and guns, the kind of language he will speak to the Arabs if they refuse the colonization of the Arab partition part. This was his plan 10 years prior to actually what happened. Secondly, he talks about the Arab states starting the war, again, selectively quoting Benny Morris. Benny Morris is talking about the Arab states who invaded to rescue the Palestinians in 1948, not who started it's called the Civil War in Palestine. Who started that wasn't the Arab states. There was no Arab states there. The first military operation by the Haganah happened when there was not a single Arab soldier from any of these Arab states setting foot in the Mandate of Palestine. So I think of being disingenuous there. Also, the reference that, firstly, there are rituals that can be performed in the temple and are required to be performed in the temple in temple Judaism. I understand this. You don't need a state to do that. But if you had a state, what does the Bible command? It says you must rule by the law of God, the law of Moses only, not secular liberalism, not that Western ideology you imported into the Middle East. That's not ruling according to the Tanakh, right? And what does the Tanakh say about those who don't rule by God's commands, who doesn't abide by God's commands, that you will be kicked out of the land as a punishment? It says it in the Tanakh. So if you want to bring religion into this, you can if you want to, but it doesn't support you. It only condemns you even further. As for saying, oh, but there were Arabs still there are still Arabs living today in the state of Palestine, or they call it the state of Israel. That wasn't my argument. My argument was that they couldn't manage 40%. They wanted to reduce, they don't want to get rid of all the Arabs. Did I say that? They wanted to reduce their demographics down to a manageable number. You need cheap labor. Ben Gurion talked about the need for cheap labor in the new state, and the Arabs could supply that. They wanted to reduce the numbers of Arabs, not remove them. That's a straw man of my position. I never said that. So this is where I think you're being disingenuous on this. Benny Morris himself remarked that there was no concerted effort by any Arab leadership to initiate any military operations against the Jewish agency prior to the establishment of the State of Israel. The student agency initiated with their Haganah militia. They initiated the first military operations, and that is something you're not letting the audience understand.
So I'm going to pick up on the point about the Tanakh and Israel being ruled under the law of Moses in a Torah state. Now, I'm not sure if you've been to yeshiva and got semicha. There are people in this audience that do have rabbinic ordination. But let me, if you will indulge me, ladies and gentlemen, let me give you what we call in Hebrew a shiur, a little Torah lesson. The great Jewish scholar Rambam, Maimonides, who was born in 1138, uses the example of the Chashmonoim, the Maccabees of the Jewish festival of Hanukkah, who after defeating the Greek and reclaiming the temple in Jerusalem, appointed a king from a tribe of priests rather than from the tribe of Judah, which is forbidden according to Jewish law halacha. Yet despite the fact it was forbidden, nevertheless, Rambam, one of the greatest sages of our times, Maimonides, rules, we must celebrate the fact that Jewish sovereignty returned. The Rambam goes on to emphasize that we must thank God for every single year of Jewish sovereignty in Israel, no matter what the sovereignty looks like. Ramban Nachmanides, born in 1194, says, he particularly emphasizes that the mitzvah, the biblical commandment of re-establishing sovereignty in the land of Israel, which applies to all generations, is not to abandon her to the hands of any other nation. All this proves from a Jewish religious perspective that national independence of Israel is so important that it's better to have a secular Jewish state than not to have a Jewish state at all. In addition, the Maharal, the great sage from Prague, born in 1525, and Rabbi Abraham Kook, who was born in 1865, speak about Al-Chalta de Geula, the beginning of the redemption before the Messiah, and explains that it's possible to know how the redemption will be by looking at the opposite, the exile. Exile is characterized by three aspects: from our natural place, being scattered, and servitude. Conversely, the signs of redemption are the return to Israel, the gathering and unification of the nation, and independence. These great Jewish rabbis state that the founding of the state of Israel is the beginning of that process. And finally, let's talk about the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, the books that rabbis have to study to become rabbis, which was written, by the way, in Safat under Ottoman rule. The Shulchan Aruch says that one who sees the cities of Judea in their destruction must say your holy cities have become a desert and tear his clothes. What's the definition of destruction that obligates the tearing of one's clothes? It's the halachic the Gemara teaches us, the Talmud teaches us that the law of tearing garments came from the story of the people who came to Gedaliah, the governor of Judea, and tore their clothes on the destruction of Mitzpeh, a Jewish city, despite the fact that many Jewish residents lived there. And from here, the sages teach us that even if Jews live there, they're considered to be in destruction if the Arabs rule over them. And finally, Reb Moshe Feinstein, the greatest ultra-Orthodox sage of modern time, so don't lecture me about Jewish law, says that even though through our many sins we've still yet to be redeemed by the Messiah, one should not tear his clothes when he sees Jerusalem, because in God's kindness it has been gloriously built up and is not under the rule of non-Jewish nations. Do not lecture us on halacha and the state of Israel as a Jewish state today.
I wouldn't presume to lecture you on this. I actually got these arguments from the Satmar and obviously Naturi Carter, who, by the way, represented the majority religious Jewish opinion prior to 1967. Represented, even Chaim Weizmann and others talk about that the majority of Jewish opinion, religious Jewish opinion, was against them, right, back then. So that was the majority Jewish opinion. You can't simply say, well, now there's demographics of Jewish opinion now decide what is or what isn't God's law, right? So you debate with them. I'm just mentioning their argument. You can have a little debate with them. But the point is that I don't think that the Bible or any of the rabbinic scholars intended a secular state that permitted things which the Bible would hold to be prohibited in a state. That being said, though, I don't really think anything else was you said that was of any substance. The point being is, and this is where there's going to be the argument is, we're not here to talk about the Jewish religion per se. We're here to talk about the universal principles of self-determination according to the nationalist framework. I'm not a nationalist per se, but I'm going to argue from that because people must be held to be consistent. If you argue that anyone who opposes Jewish right to self-determination is an anti-Semite, then you're anti-Semites too. You're anti-Arab racist for opposing Palestinians' right to also have self-determination. And because they are a larger number and all humans are equal, they are, aren't they? You do believe that. Because all humans are equal, then that means that the Palestinians have a superior right to self-determination without even going into debates about legacy and connection to the land, as if the Palestinians are not indigenous to that land, as is proved by numerous genetic studies, right? Even Ben-Gurion said that the Palestinians were most likely those who, their ancestors were Jews who became Christians and then converted to Islam. Even Ben-Gurion recognized that. But it didn't stop him from denying their rights nonetheless. And that's the point. The point here is not about denying anyone's right to self-determination. It's about inequality. It's about racial supremacy, racial privilege. And that is why any man and any woman of good conscience should oppose Zionism, because opposing Zionism is simply promoting Palestinian rights.
Before I come on to the Satmar and the Turikata, let me just remind Abdullah, I mentioned the Rambam, the Ramban, the Shulchan Aruch, the Maharal of Prague, Reb Moshe Feinstein. There are rabbis in this audience who I'm sure would be happy to confirm these are some of the greatest sages of our time. I'm quoting them. That has substance. In terms of the Satmar, let me tell you something about the Satmar. The Satmar number about 0.5% of the global Jewish population. And if you think that they believe that the land of Israel, or the Holy Land as it was, belongs to anybody else but the Jews, you're wrong. They're just operating on a different timeline. They believe that it will become Jewish when the Messiah comes. They don't believe it belongs to anybody else. And when you're talking about the Naturikata, you can't even lump the Satmar, who I would call non-Zionists as opposed to anti-Zionists, because they've never advocated for the physical destruction of the state of Israel, whereas the Naturikata have actually goes to meet with the Ayatollah in Iran and stand with Hamas. They've actually been openly criticized by the Satmar. The Satmar Grand Rebbe criticized them for standing with the enemies of Jews. So that's that. In terms of Palestinian self-determination and DNA, I mean, it's interesting, actually, you say that, because there have been numerous studies done that have shown that the priestly tribe of Kohanim can be traced back to one single ancestor who lived between 1000 and 586 BCE. The tribe of Levites have been traced back to a common ancestor in the Middle East, just like the priests. And Ashkenazim have been traced back to 4 mothers, also in the Middle East. But what I would say to Abdullah is the following. I absolutely believe in Palestinian self-determination. I believe in 2 states living side by side in peace and security. The fact that the Palestinians in 1937, in 1947, in 2000, in 2008, in 2005 said no every single time, that's their problem. But I believe in 2 states, a Jewish state of Israel, nation state of the Jewish people, and the Palestinians living side by side. Do you believe in 2 states?
Okay, so I was just going to bring up something here. So there's basically, there's a book you can read called A Peace to End All Peace, Creating the Modern Middle East. David Fromm calculates, that the historian, in 1913, the last date for which there were figures, only about 1% of the world's Jews had signified their adherence to Zionism. 1% at that point in time. So at one point, Jews were not convinced by your argument. Have you now discovered something that Jews for most of their history didn't know? Yes, of course, you're waiting for the Messiah to come and to give Jerusalem and create peace across the whole world. And the Messiah is going to rule the whole world, not just Palestine. Don't tell me you're going to use that as a pretext now to start conquering the whole world, because the Messiah will also rule the whole world. I hope not. But here's the thing. The question that we really need to ask is, do Palestinians have the right of self-determination? And if they do, and they have a connection to that land, just as strong as anyone else's, if not more, then, and they have more numbers, then are you going to be consistent with talking about self-determination? Are you going to be a believer in equality like you claim you are? I'm assuming you do believe in equality of human beings. And if so, then what does that mean if the Palestinians are in greater number and they have a connection to that land? What happens then? Right? I want a state for everybody. I want a state where everyone is free and equal. That would be consistent. Who here is arguing against that? It's not me. And therefore, who here should be opposed morally and politically? Well, it's not someone that advocates for equality, does it? As for, he hasn't answered my question as to whether Einstein is actually an anti-Semite for saying that the Palestinians should be given the land because they are the majority. He hasn't answered that question, though. Does E equals anti-Semitism squared? You need to answer that question. Okay, As for genetic studies, there's studies in from to year 2020, is a recent one, 2017, 2001. I've got them actually here if you want to quote them. All state that Palestinians are related to Canaanites and have more Canaanite DNA than Ashkenazim or European or Jewish Europeans do. So if they're more related to people 4,000 years ago that was in that region from the bodies in Megiddo and the DNA they discovered there, does that mean now, would you concede they then have a superior right and connection to that land? Or do you only have to be Jewish to have a connection to that land? But anyone else, if you're from the wrong religion, you can't be connected to that land. Is that what you're trying to say seriously to all of us? Right? Yeah. Yes. Also, I'm not here denying that Jewish Europeans have a Middle Eastern DNA, have a ancestry to the Levant. I didn't say that. I hope I didn't say it without knowing, but I don't believe that. The genetic studies show that, yes, Ashkenazim or Jewish Europeans do have DNA from the Levant. But they also have DNA in roughly equal proportion that's from Europe. So as Europe is equally your homeland, as is the Middle East. But for the Palestinians, it is only Palestine as their homeland.
How many more have we got? How many more rebuttals have we got?
2 more. Can I just remind everyone to keep quiet, please? I'm glad that we've been able to get to this stage. So whilst the speakers are talking, can you please keep your comments to yourself? We've got 2 more rebuttals from each before we move on to questions. Thank you, Rafi.
Just to clarify, when I spoke about Messiah and the Satmar, it was simply to disprove the fact that you brought the Satmar to say that they can't be anti-Zionists. I was merely explaining to you what their religious viewpoint is, that they still believe that the land of Israel will be Jewish, just on a different timeline. And all the way through this, the indigenous connection of the Jews to the land of Israel, but the fact that we've prayed for it for millennia, both in exile, and remember that the Jews are the only people to have had an unbroken connection to the land of Israel over 3,000 years. Yes, we were dispersed. Yes, we went to Europe. Yes, we went to Babylon. Yes, we went to Rome. However, we kept an unbroken connection to that land. And the connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel goes back way before Christianity and Islam, where we created a society there in the days of Joshua. We created a kingdom there in the time of Saul. And we created a nation with Jerusalem as its capital in the days of King David, all more than 3,000 years ago. Jews are the only people who've ever had a nation state in the land of Israel. Yes, there have been colonial conquerors there, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Crusaders, the Ottomans. But Jews are the only people who've maintained a continuous presence in the land, and they are its indigenous original people, and the DNA proves it. And I'm not saying, by the way, that Palestinians shouldn't have a state of their own. There should be 2 states living side by side, each with their own nationality, each with their own customs. That's absolutely what I believe. I note that Abdullah cannot bring himself to say that the state of Israel should exist alongside the state of Palestine. When the United Nations gave or presented the option of 2 states and the Jews took it, that was the momentous occasion and the reversal of imperialism of the state of Israel. It gave back the Jewish people the home that was taken away from them. Israel is the only non-artificial creation in the Middle East after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire because we've always been there. It's always been our land, in our religion, in our liturgy, in our practices, in our DNA. It's always been our land. And you can try and deny it all you want, but why would Jews have prayed for that for millennia if it didn't mean anything to us? That's the unbreakable connection between Israel and the Jewish people. It's absolutely inherent, it's indigenous, and that's who we are. And that's in terms of the Jews. But Judaism also began with 2 journeys to the land, one by Abraham and Sarah, and one by Moses with the Israelites. As I said before, 26 of the 613 commandments of the Bible can only be done in Israel. Why would we have that in the Jewish Bible if it wasn't our homeland? Think about it. And through all the centuries of dispersal, we prayed to return to that place in sovereignty, in freedom, so we can build our own society, our own religion, our own set of ethics. And that is what we have done, and that is the right decision.
So all I'm hearing is, who cares about equality between human beings? We want it, so we get it, basically. And really, well, that's what it is, because self-determination, no? No? Everyone's equal, right? Palestinians are not aliens to that land, and if they're the majority and you believe in equality, what follows? Finish the equation. You don't want to finish that equation because it goes somewhere that's against your absolutist nationalistic desires. You know, no one really said that when they want to change the apartheid system of South Africa, you want to destroy South Africa. You want to destroy it, wipe it off the map. No, we just want it to be free and equal for everybody. Is that a problem? Of course, the South African apologists, who were white nationalists, made many arguments, some of which are eerily similar. But no, we don't want to destroy any states there. We just want to broaden the state out for everyone as equal citizens. Is that a problem? Yes, it is. It is for his nationalism. As for the saying that Jews have always been in Palestine, well, one of the things that I try not to do, and it's an anti-Semitic trope, which is to say all Jews are the same. Edwin Montagu, who was the only Jewish member of the British cabinet during the time of the Balfour Declaration, opposed it. He accused the British government of being anti-Semitic. He's saying that he was a British Jew, and to say that Jews should be in Palestine is to say they don't belong in England. And he said that he is not the same, he doesn't follow the same customs, nor speaks the same language, or has the same sentiments as a Jew from the Middle East. Right? They just have the same religion, that's it. And he used the example, in a way I'm plagiarizing him, that German Christians are not the same as Arab Christians just because they follow Christianity. And Christianity has a connection to that place. Doesn't mean now they should now rule it, although at one point they tried to. Right? So that's a bogus argument. Yes, go do your rituals in Jerusalem, all you want. Who let Jews in after the Romans had banned them from Jerusalem? It was Muslims. The second Caliph of Islam, Umar anhum, he let Muslims in Jerusalem. Practice all you want. Practice all you want. Follow your customs, follow your religion, great. But don't come and dominate people who are the majority because you claim some minority privilege. That's not the same thing. And I think I'll just also cite that I don't want to go too much into ancient history, but there was never a nation state in the land of Palestine. Never for a Jewish nation state. This is a modern creation. We can talk about the 12 tribes were divided up into different areas. That's not a nation state, is it? Right? Neither was there a kingdom that came afterwards, and neither was the separation between the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judea. Those are not nation states to me. They just sound like ancient kingdoms and ethnic tribal divisions between tribes, not nation states. That's a modern idea.
Of course, there was a nation state of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. King David had a nation state in the land of Israel. Abdullah doesn't like nationalism because he wants a caliphate, so we'll deal with that at another time. However, what I would say about this is, and we talk about equal rights, I've said numerous times that I believe a Palestinian state living alongside a Jewish state, two states living in peace and security, that is the way that we should do it. Now, those who advocate for a one-state solution, which is really what Abdullah is doing, are naive at best, but really dangerously disingenuous at worst. And why is that? Because he knows full well that in this utopian one state, there would very soon be a Muslim majority. And that's before you bring about the so-called 5 million refugees who would be allowed back in, who aren't really refugees because they're fifth-generation Palestinians from all across the world. And very soon, the Jews would be a minority in that state. And that's before, by the way, that state would then become a Muslim theocracy. And that's before, by the way, you take into account that a survey done in 2018 by the Palestinian Center for Survey and Research, along with the Steinmetz Center for Peace, showed that something like just under a third of Palestinians would seek to practice apartheid or expulsion on the Jews in one state, and 40% of Hamas supporters want to practice either expulsion or apartheid on Jews in a one-state solution. So we know what happens to Jews as minorities in the Middle East. We've never fared well. Yes, it's very generous of the Caliph to let the Jews back in after the Roman expulsion, but the key words are, let them back in. It's our land. Now, you can talk that we were allowed to freely practice our religion, but we know what that means. It means paying the jizya and the tax and being dhimmis and being tolerated at best. Well, sorry, the days of Jews being tolerated are long gone. Now, the Palestinians, on the other hand, have always rejected peace. Every single time they've been told, you can have sovereignty in your own state, but you'd have to be sovereign alongside a Jewish state, no longer tolerated by you, no longer ruled by you, no longer under your boot. Every single time, again and again, they have said no. Why is that? Because they do not see a place for a Jewish state of Israel in the Arab Middle East between the river and the sea. So I'm sorry that might offend some people, but the Jews have always, whenever there's been peace on the table, we've been willing, the Israelis and the Jews have been willing to make peace in return for security. The Palestinians have always said no. Why have they said no? Because they don't believe in Jews having self-determination.
I was kind of hoping he would bring up something he mentioned in the previous debate, because I had a refutation ready for it, which was he cited a poll that said 1/3 of Palestinians want, was it transfer and what was it? Sorry, expulsion of Jews and expulsion, transfer, apartheid. That's a lie. I checked that very same poll. Doesn't say that at all. In fact, the vast majority, over 50%, are actually for a two-state solution. And what he also doesn't mention is in that very same poll, because Israeli Jews were asked, 1/3 did say they wanted expulsion or apartheid of Palestinians. Thank you for that. I was hoping he'd repeat that lie, and I'm thank you for that. It's a 2018 poll, by the Palestinian Center for Surveys and Studies, so research. Okay, he's going back to the thing. Now, there was a poll in 2018 that a Pew poll asked Israeli Jews what they think about Palestinians that live amongst them, so citizens. 49%, and because there were others undecided, so the majority against those who were against it, the majority said they would want the transfer of Palestinian Arabs out of the state of Israel, not from the West Bank, not from the state of Israel itself. Why does he not talk about that kind of mentality amongst Israeli Jews, or his fellow citizens? I'm sure you said you're an Israeli citizen as well, right? So your fellow citizens. And then he also lies about peace initiatives. Arabs gave up on trying to retake Palestine, make it a unitary equal state. They gave up on it ages ago. Right? That's the basic premise of the PLO was they gave up on that. They just wanted the 1967 borders back. Like, just give us what you conquered, what you said you didn't want, you didn't need, you weren't going to take. Just give it back. Israel says no. In 1986, the Arab League makes an initiative to Israel saying, we will give normalization, peace, everything, recognize you. It will be normal relations, no more tensions. Just give back what you took in the West Bank and Gaza and Sinai and the Golan. Israel says no. 2002, the Arab Peace Initiative, everyone, even members of Hamas were saying in that they will be willing to offer normalization and agreement from every Arab country, the entire Arab League, and even Iran agreed to the Arab Peace Initiative to say that we will give normalization with the State of Israel if they just gave what the UN has said they would withdraw from occupied West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan. Israel said no. And that's because Israel doesn't want peace. It doesn't want peace with all the people. It just wants, settle down, guys, don't be the new disruptors. All right? Israel doesn't want peace with all the people. It wants a peace of other people's land.
Can you hear me? Is this on? I don't think this is on. Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to the question section now. The way this bit's going to work, we've selected 8 questions and 4 addressed to each of the speakers. So you'll each have 3 minutes to respond to the questions addressed to you, and we'll bring the other speaker in for a couple of minutes after. So the first question is for Rafi. We've had people express concerns that this debate might create or exacerbate divisions within our community. Can a debate framed on these terms promote mutual understanding on such complex topics?
It's a really good question. Sorry. It's a really good question. What we've seen since October the 7th is, in the UK, is an unprecedented rise in Jew hatred. And a large amount of that happened actually before Israel even began to respond to the Hamas massacre on October the 7th. These were people who came out to engage in anti-Semitic acts as a way of supporting the Hamas massacre. It's almost as if they didn't want to feel left out. And so the Jews have experienced this, Jewish people in the UK have experienced this now for the past 12, 13 months. We've been attacked in our synagogues, in our schools, in hospitals when we go for treatment. And so what's really important is dialogue. Now, Abdullah and I are never going to agree with each other. That's a clear, you've seen that tonight. But to be able to have civil discourse and to be able to talk to each other and understand each other's differences, even if we don't like what each other's saying, is really important. And the fact that those of you who remain in the room tonight and have actually been able to listen to myself and Abdullah, I think that is a very important thing for us to do. We're British UK citizens. Some of us might have dual nationality, but all of us here, most of us are Mancunians. We're proud Jewish Mancunians. We've worked to make Manchester the great city it is. The Jewish community have a proud history here going back over 150 years. And so debates like this are important. It's important that we can listen to each other. They're passionate, they're fiery. We very much firmly believe in our positions. But it's absolutely important for community cohesion that we can have these discussions and we can understand each other's points, even if we don't agree.
I'd say that primarily what you could say divides us is the political ideology and disagreement over it and what's happening in the land of Palestine. This has got nothing to do with a religious disagreement. Let's just say, just look at the different perspectives from different sides. So why would a Muslim hate Jews specifically? You're monotheists. You don't worship idols. You don't believe in the Trinity doctrine, and you don't believe in the incarnation of God in human form, which for Muslims, that's a big issue, right? We are against idolatry. You don't eat the meat of carrion. You exsanguinate the meat before it dies, which is kosher. And Muslims, we have halal meat, right? We can even eat kosher meat. It's clean for us. We can marry Jews. It's deemed to be wrong or bad in Islam at all to marry Jews. There is a lot of cultural similarities, a lot of religious similarities being two Semitic religions. In fact, even anti-Semitism, the term, was coined for that because initially, like Ernest Renan, the French anti-Semite, at one point anyway, he attacked both Islam and Judaism, both Arabs and Jews, as inferior Semitic peoples and civilization. That's why it's called anti-Semitism, not just anti-Jewishness. Right? So technically, we were included in that originally. So there's no reason for us to specifically hate Jews at all. And of course, as for Muslims, we follow the 6 Noahide laws, which is what Jews were, I'm not going to presume, obviously, your religion, but it's what you're meant to encourage amongst the Gentiles. Please do correct me if I'm wrong, right? So we follow the 6 Noahide laws. We're not polytheists, we're not idolaters, we don't eat the blood or the meat of carrion. We have a law system, all this kind of stuff. This is what's required. So there's no real animus. What is the animus is where people associate Zionism and make it intrinsic to Judaism, because that, unfortunately, is going to encourage anti-Semitism in many people, because they actually believe believe the lie. They think that is connected. I think it's not. That's why I'm not anti-Semitic.
Okay, the next question is addressed to Abdullah. Considering the horror of the Holocaust and the persistence of anti-Semitism across the globe, Why shouldn't we defend Israel's right to exist as a place of refuge for Jewish people, as well as its right to self-determination more generally? 3 minutes.
Okay, people have a right to self-determination, not states. Right? States are meant to serve people, not the other way around, by the way, so in case people forget. Firstly, the issue is that many people around the world have suffered and have been persecuted and have been massacred and been genocided and a whole bunch of things, very horrible things. But this doesn't justify doing that to another people then. You're not justified. Okay? And that's why many Jews of good conscience who say they're following Jewish values, I don't have any reason to disbelieve that at all, are opposing Zionism, like Einstein did, which you haven't answered to me, is he anti-Semitic? He still hasn't answered that question. Maybe one day he'll answer it, all right? And this is easily stressed. Maybe I'm going to ask him another question. I want to make it easy for him, okay? So he says he believes in equality, right? So he said that Jews have a right to return to the land of Palestine, no matter how intermixed or how different cultures or different languages they are following or adopting around the world. Okay, but then do Palestinians who have been out of the land in a much shorter time than European Jews have, 2,000 years plus, do they have an equal right to return to their land of their ancestors? Answer this.
The answer, well, in the first instance, I just proved in my opening statement that Judaism and Zionism are intrinsically connected. I don't know what he was listening to, but why would it be a center of all our festivals, all our prayers, all our liturgy, mentioned so many times in the Tanakh and in the Siddur, the return to Zion, the rebuilding of Jerusalem, sovereignty in our own land, it's part of our festivals, it's part of our wedding ceremonies. When you go to a Jewish house of mourning, you say, may you be comforted amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. There are 4 fast days dedicated to remembering Jerusalem. I mean, for goodness sake, how much more do I need to go on to show Zionism and Judaism are intrinsically connected? And so, if you're going to hate Jews because they're Zionists, then you're just a racist, basically. In terms of the right of return, it's actually interesting because, I don't know if you know this or not, but 75% of Gazans today are registered as refugees. 5th-generation Gazans are registered as refugees. Now, they've never lived anywhere but Gaza, and they live in what all of us would agree in a 2-state solution is between the river and the sea. It would be part of Palestinian state. Why are they still registered as refugees? Because for them, there is an overwhelming desire to return. For them, return is not to the West Bank or Gaza or in any state that, by the way, Israel offered in 2000 and 2008 and withdrew from Gaza in 2005. Pretty much offering in 2000 and 2008 98%, and Bill Clinton has confirmed this of what they wanted. But let's leave that for one side because I think that's just another lie that he's going to come up with. But what I would say is that the right of return is to Palestinian areas. Absolutely, they should be allowed to go back. But what is the right of return? What is refugees? Is Gigi Hadid's father, who was born in Israel, who went to Syria and is now an American multi-millionaire, billionaire citizen, he's still registered with UNRWA as a refugee. Should he be allowed to return to Israel? No. Refugees can return to the Palestinian territories or when it becomes a Palestinian state, and Jews can return to Israel.
Okay, so the next question is addressed to Rafi. What moral obligation does Israel have to the families that either remain in Gaza and the West Bank or have been displaced due to the conflict in the Middle East?
Let's take a step back and talk about, I'm not sure about the question. Is the question talking about the current conflict or the age-old, or the 76 conflict?
It's not specific. I think it's general.
Okay, so we've shown during this debate that if we're talking about families that were displaced during the War of Independence, absolutely they left for a number of reasons, but not because of a specific Israeli plan for expulsion. There's absolutely nothing written anywhere that proves that. And we've seen statements from Arab leaders to show that the Arabs told them to leave, that they would come back. And in fact, Abu Mazen said it was the Arabs who were at fault for the Palestinian refugee problem. Now, it has been said that in any peace treaty, there would be compensation limited compensation for refugees. But everybody understands that in any peace treaty that happens between Israel and the Palestinians, there is not going to be a right of return. And until the Palestinians understand that any right of return is into any Palestinian state that is formed, they're only rejecting that because they genuinely don't want peace. So the answer is, and even Resolution 242, by the way, talked about the solution for the refugees, but talked about compensation mostly and understood that there would never be huge return. Resolution 242, by the way, didn't call for Israel to withdraw from all the territories in 1967. It called for it to withdraw from territories, understanding even then that there would be negotiation. So ultimately, the only people responsible for displacement of Palestinian families is the intransigence and the failure of the Palestinians over 70 plus years to make peace with Israel, to allow the Jews to have a nation state of its own people, and to live side by side and do the right thing by its own citizens. And as I've said over and over again, the Palestinians have always dealt in absolutism. They've always said, if there should be a free Jewish state living alongside our own state, we'd rather have nothing. So ultimately, Israel bears no responsibility for this. It's clear as day. The Palestinians, as Abba Eban said, never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And it's incumbent on the Palestinian leadership to make peace with Israel and to accept the offers that have been done and accept Israel's right to exist. Can I carry on? And if we want to know really why there's been no peace, let's just use some quotes from, I won't even use the old Hamas charter, let's use the new Hamas charter of 2017. A real state of Palestine is a state that's been liberated. There is no alternative to a fully sovereign Palestinian state on the entire national Palestinian soil with Jerusalem as its capital. They talk about the establishment of Israel is entirely illegal and contravenes the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people and goes against their will and the will of the Ummah. There should be no recognition of the legitimacy of the Zionist entity. Hamas rejects any alternatives to the full and complete liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. Ladies and gentlemen, if anybody's at fault for no peace, and again, I want two states, it's the Palestinians.
Okay, so I'm going to answer a whole bunch of things as quickly as I can. Again, all he's ever shown is that Judaism requires religious practice in the vicinity of Jerusalem, but not to rule the whole land of Palestine. You haven't shown me a single verse of the Bible that says that Jews must be the rulers of the entire land of Palestine. And explain to me why Israel is in south of Beersheba. Historically, there's never been a Jewish state south of Beersheba. It's in the Negev desert or the Naqab desert. It's been the Edomites. It's actually even the Bible was called the homeland of the Edomites. What are you doing there then? Get out of Eilat if it's not your homeland. Right? But you don't care because Israel doesn't care about historical rights. It just cares about as much land as possible. Again, citing that the Arab, this canard that's been refuted over and over again. The point that saying that Arabs left, the Palestinians left Palestine in 1947 because they were told to leave and they'll come back. It's the opposite. They were called traitors for leaving, cowards. They were told not to go to the lands, to Syria, what have you. They still streamed in. Even they were trying to be stopped at the borders. They were actually said, no, because when you leave, then it'll be harder to get it back. Also, just read Benny Morris's a whole number of his books, right? You cite him. He's a Zionist, like, for example, his book 1948, or Righteous Victims, or The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem. He cites documentation that's been declassified from the Israeli government, proving deliberate campaigns where the commander on the scene was actually ordered to expel the Palestinians from different towns and different cities, and so on and so forth. It's not even a matter of dispute anymore, even though why you're bringing it up. You need to do your homework. This is at a university here. It's going to look bad. Okay, and notice how he says, yeah, of course Palestinians have a right to return to their own areas. Imagine he said, yeah, Jews can go there, but only to their own areas. Sounds pretty anti-Semitic, but it's okay for him to say that about Arabs. Yeah? If it was racist to say that about Jews, it's equally racist to say that about Arabs. Only go back to their own areas. And by the way, their areas were ethnically cleansed, and Israel doesn't want them to go back to their areas. Why not talk about that? Okay, sure. That's fine.
So the next question is addressed to Abdullah. Some people have said that because we don't see the same kinds of protests when other serious global conflicts occur, there is an undercurrent of anti-Semitism in protests about Israel and Gaza. Do you think that is the case?
Yeah, I've often said, how comes when there are other countries who have the world record for the longest military occupation of the land that are given billions of pounds and billions of dollars by the American government with no accountability for that, who are funded by the West, and is a Western country which purports to be a liberal democracy, why don't we protest about all those other governments? Oh, wait a second, they don't exist. Israel is literally the only one that fits all those criteria. You argue why is Israel the exception when Israel literally is the exception, which is the hilariousness of it. As for the peace proposals, now remember what I mentioned Abba Egan, the foreign minister, the one who actually first touted the lie that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and he talked about the plan for the Palestinians in the West Bank. They're not going to get 100% self-determination. Look at all the maps of the peace proposals, and might I add, the Palestinians came to these negotiations with their own proposals, always rejected by Israel. Even when they compromise, they say, okay, let's have land swaps. Okay, we won't dismantle all settlements. Can we have some right of return? Israel has always rejected it. He never talks about that side of the equation. Only the Palestinian side. Only the Palestinian. And I have one simple rebuttal to that. Look at every single peace proposal proposed by the State of Israel to the Palestinians. They're not allowed to control their airspace. They have no right of return to refugees going back to the State of Israel, which is a major issue. They get booted out of a lot of East Jerusalem, which is meant to be their capital. Their state is cut into pieces with the Ariel settlement cut right in the top in there. It's a fragmented state that doesn't control its own airspace or even its own borders. That's not 100% self-determination. Israel doesn't want 100% self-determination, and they never did, by the admission of its foreign minister all the way back in 1973. Why don't we ever talk about that? And lastly, of course, he talks about not letting the Palestinians go back to where they actually came from for all their villages in Palestine. And yet, the State of Israel is very dogged about returning Jews to every place that was ever documented that were Jews living there. Whether it was Hebron or Sheikh Jarrah or Silwan, they will say, we're going to take back these properties that used to be belonging to Jews. But they never give it to Palestinians. Why? Because Palestinians are not equal to Jews in the eyes of Zionists.
Again, I seem to have to keep on saying this, but a secular Jewish state sits perfectly well with religious Judaism. How many more times do I need to quote Nachmanides, Maimonides, the Shulchan Aruch? I mean, for goodness sake, you either understand the Jews and Jewish religion, or you just want to quote things to misrepresent and distort what Judaism stands for. In terms of land and peace, maybe Abdullah has forgotten his history, but Israel gave the Sinai back to Egypt. That was Menachem Begin. Ariel Sharon left the Gaza Strip in 2005. Something like 80% of Palestinians, 90% of Palestinians in the West Bank live under Palestinian Authority rule. But we'll leave those facts now because they're clearly not convenient. Now, every country has the right to control its own borders and decide who comes in. We do it here in the UK, the Americans do it, the Europeans do it, everybody does it. Everybody understands in this peace deals that the right of return is not going to happen into Israel. They will be absorbed in the new Palestinian state that comes into existence. Now, that Palestinian state should be here. The Palestinians should have their own state, but they've been let down by their leaders time and time again. Abu Mazen is 19 years into a 4-year reign. Hamas are theological Islamists who want to destroy the whole of Israel. So forgive the Jews for saying, we want you to have peace, we want you to have your own state, but we're just going to wait a bit until we know that we're not going to be attacked by it, and the rest of a new Palestinian state is not going to be Gaza Mark II. And with regards, it's very easy for Abdullah to want to sacrifice us all. But in terms of the protests, I'll tell you why the protests against Israel are anti-Semitic, right? Because Turkey is a major customer of UK arms, a member of NATO. It's been murdering Kurds. So it's a Muslim state, but it's been murdering Kurds for years. Okay. It's never been protested against. Saudi Arabia helped kill thousands of people in Yemen. They've never protested against that. It's only the Jews.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? No more questions.
So the next question is addressed to Rafi. How does the right of Israelis to live in peace and security coexist with the rights of Palestinians to live in peace and security? You've got 3 minutes.
Well, the first way that happens is for the Palestinians to understand that the state of Israel has a right to exist, that the state of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people has a right to exist, and that those factions within the Palestinian movement who seek to destroy the state of Israel, as I just quoted from the Hamas charter, forget the old charter that called about killing Jews all over the world, the new one, which just talks about destroying Israeli Jews and murdering Israeli Jews, that they have to accept the right of Israel to exist. And the regional proxies and the regional countries like Iran also have to agree that Israel has the right to exist. Now, we've seen some movement on that. The Abraham Accords was a fantastic way of the Gulf states recognizing Israel's right to exist. Egypt recognized Israel's right to exist. Jordan recognized Israel's right to exist. But there are many, many other countries in the Middle East that have not recognized Israel's right to exist. And this is the problem. Abdullah still won't say it. He wants this unitary state, this binational state. I mean, the interesting thing about Abdullah is actually he doesn't want nation states at all. So I'm not sure what he thinks, what flag this state would have, what language it would have, what roles it would play, how it would identify itself. What Abdullah actually wants is an Islamic caliphate across the whole of the Middle East and probably into the West. So let's not be fooled by his nicety about wanting a biracial state where everybody's together, because A, we know that wouldn't work. Does anybody really think that after 76 years of struggle, the Palestinians are going to give up their flag, their nationality, their customs? Absolutely not, right? That's number one. Number two, as I said before, we know that Jews would not fare well in this state. They would be a minority, it would become a Muslim theocracy. Jews have never fared well under Muslim rule in the Middle East, and that's just a fact. Okay, that's an absolute fact. He'll tell you otherwise, and yes, they might have fared better than under Christianity in Europe, but they absolutely never fared well. So ultimately, how do the two states live side by side in peace and security? With an acceptance by the Palestinians that the Jewish state has a right to exist. Even as recently as in recent years, the Palestinian Authority have come out with statements that call for the liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. So how can you expect there to be peace when the Palestinians have this attitude of all or nothing? I mean, the truth is that they want absolutism, as I said, and until they can accept the fact that the Jews are not going anywhere, that the Jews are the indigenous people of the state of Israel, that it's a return to ancestral homeland, then unfortunately there won't be peace because the Palestinians don't want peace.
Who's he debating against? At any point, did me or did I say, wait, more sorry, now, it's okay, it's their side's turn to disrupt. All right, can we respect free speech? Yeah, let me speak. Don't worry, just trust your colleague here to argue for you if you want, if you have confidence in him. Okay, all right, yes, yeah. No one's saying that Jews should go anywhere at all whatsoever. We're talking about the simply equal rights for Palestinians. That's all we're talking about. But you see how they try to divert the argument. Oh, you just want to kill Jews, what have you? I want to quote something. You might find this interesting. The choice before us is one of two divergent courses. Either that of integration, which in the long run would amount to national suicide on the part of the whites, or that of apartheid, which professes to preserve the identity and safeguard the future of every race with complete scope for everyone to develop within their own sphere while maintaining their own distinctive national character. Who said this? It was the National Party, the manifesto of the National Party in 1947 of the apartheid South African regime. See the similarity? That's how you sound like. That's what you sound like. By the way, states don't have a right to exist. People have a right to exist. If you prioritized people over states, you wouldn't be killing so many of them. Yeah. Oh, he said, oh, Israel gave back cyanide to the Egyptians. Oh, that's nice. But when Egypt asked before 1973, we'll have a peace deal with you, just give it back. What did Israel do? 2 points with Golda Meir? Refused. No, we're keeping it. Only after there was a war and the Egyptian army was ensconced on the Sinai and couldn't be budged, then there was agreement and negotiation with the Americans. Only after Egypt launched a war to get it back, right, and kept their army there. Is that not true? Please fact check me, right? Well, okay, all right. anyway, and I'll finish this absolute last point, which is I'm not arguing whether Judaism permits Jews to have rulership in the land of Canaan or Palestine or retinue as the ancient Egyptians called it. I'm simply saying, where does it say in Judaism that Jews must be the rulers and supreme over everyone else in that land? Where does it say that? Bring it.
Is this on? Okay, I just want to remind everyone again, please stop disrupting the meeting. The same rules apply to everyone, so if there's going to be interruptions, then I'm going to have to ask you to leave. So the next question should be for Abdullah. Yeah, so the question is, what do you think the impact of the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," has on our different communities and their safety?
Okay. There's a Jewish organization called the American League for Free Palestine. Are they anti-Semites? Depends what they mean by Free Palestine. No, they just said Free Palestine, and they're technically militant. They advocate for militant insurgency there. But are they anti-Semites, though?
So militant insurgency as in fighting the state of Israel?
Fighting the military occupation there.
Then they're anti-Semites.
Then they're anti-Semites. Okay, yes. The American League for Free Palestine are anti-Semites. I have some bad news for you guys. This is 1947, and they were supporting the Irgun. It's your own people. You just condemned your own people. Oh my God. I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed for you. I thought maybe he knew it. I thought he'd catch me out. Admittedly, I had it planned, but I thought he'd catch me out. No, he didn't know. These were people fighting, they were fighting the military occupation of the British. That's the military occupation they were fighting against, for free Palestine. It's okay to say free Palestine when it means for Zionism. It's okay to say free South Africa when it's against the apartheid regime. No one says that means white genocide, well, maybe apart from the white racist regime. But to say the same thing apparently is anti-Semitic. And that's how ridiculous this motion is today. This is how ridiculous it is. Freedom for everybody. What next are you going to say? Black Lives Matter? Oh, that's racist. That means Black Lives Matter more than whites. No, it doesn't. Right? Free Palestine means free for everyone. Right? Why don't you believe that? Why don't you believe that? Why don't you believe that? Okay. I'll finish up with this point. Now, just understand the Palestinian, the mainstream leadership, right, which is Fatah and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, now has become the Palestinian Authority. They have already accepted to live in 22% of their former homeland. And even that's not good enough for Zionists like my colleague here. Right? Because, no, they have to accept further compromises, and they can't control their airspace, and they have to accept the settlements that are there, and those settlements are going to be obviously excluded for Palestinians, and they can't accept the East Jerusalem again, or they might not even control East Jerusalem again. Look at the peace proposal maps that the Israelis foisted upon them, and look at the reasonable maps that the Palestinians asked for, just 22% less than. And they, if you take them in total, all the Palestinian population are actually 2/3, again, the majority, and they have to accept 22%, and yet they're the unreasonable ones. And that's how ridiculous you sound when you criticize them for that.
It's very easy to reply to a quote out of context, of course, but anybody that seeks to be militant against the Jewish state of Israel, to destroy Israelis and Jews and to kill Israeli and Jews for the liberation of Palestine, if you attack Jews for being Jews in the state of Israel, then you're an anti-Semite. Now, again, we can talk about the Hamas Charter. And we can even talk about the PLO Charter if we want to, that talks about freedom of Palestine from the river to the sea. The PLO Charter of 1968 talks about the fact that the claims of historic and spiritual ties between Jews and Palestine are not in agreement with the facts of history. Judaism is not a nationality. I mean, you know, this is anti-Semitism. We've just established that Jews are a people and a religion. And this is an argument that goes on. And I love it the way that my colleague here likes to talk about the Torah and the Tanakh. When I've quoted time and time again the greatest sages of the Jewish religion, he doesn't understand the Jewish religion. He picks and chooses things to try and make a straw man argument, and actually he fails every time. Now, right. Now, again, he doesn't accept that the Palestinians should have their own state, does he? He wants one state, or so he claims. But really, let's ask him this, because for all those people here who want a Palestinian state, who want Palestine to be free with their own state, 3 years ago, Abdullah said, Islam is against nationalism. Full stop. The Prophet Muhammad said to Muslims they should leave nationalism and that it's rotten. Any Muslim that calls for nationalism is not one of us, and that's included today's Muslim states. You said you were not a fan of nationalism and reject all forms of nationalism. So do you or do you not advocate for the Palestinians to have a state? What is it that you're calling for? An Islamic caliphate? Can you answer the simple question? Do you believe in an Islamic caliphate across the entire Middle East, which would mean the Palestinians, for all their nationalism, won't get their own state in whatever form it takes?
So, did you know that there was already a caliphate there before the British took over Palestine? The Ottoman caliphate system. And Ben Gurion himself praised it's called the Millah system. It was a system of, Ben Gurion praised it, and he lived during Ottoman time, so he saw it for himself. He praised it, and he thought it might be a good model if Jews can't get a majority state and the British won't let them have a partition, whatever, maybe they can have some kind of local autonomy like was in the Ottoman Millah state. This is Ben Gurion's own writings on this in the 1920s. Condemn him if you like, right? There's also a great book for you to read. It's called Jewish Life Under Islam, and it's by a Jewish historian, Amnon Cohen. So it's a Kohanim. And he showed that basically Jews had justice and they were not persecuted as a general rule for Islamic law under this Islamic lands. And they weren't obliged to go to Muslim courts. They had their own law system, their own law courts, and so on and so forth. There was no professions that they were restricted from doing, like in Europe. They were free to do whatever they wished. This was the peace and justice that Islam offered, where everyone can live in autonomous religious communities, living their own life and by their own religious laws and standards. That created peace. Nationalism has always been inciting ethnic conflict, because the question is, nation, which nation? And if there's other nations, there's always a fight. And Zionism is my proof in pointing that. But my argument today is one of consistency. The Quran tells Muslims, do not dispute the people of the book, Jews and Christians, unless you see them committing injustice. Injustice does not mean they're not following Islam, because they're Christians and Jews, so they're not going to be following Islam anyway. It means they're not being consistent. And if you argue that self-determination is a right for all people, mean it. And that's all I'm saying.
Okay, is this on? Right, we've got 2 questions left. I have to say, I admire your stamina. After the 2 questions, we'll have the final remarks and then we'll wrap things up. So the next question is addressed to Rafi. Is that right, actually? Because you asked in the last one. No, we've not had this one yet. Have we had this yet? Should the historical presence of civilizations in the region from long ago have a bearing on the policies and attitudes of today?
I think that we're living in modern times, and Abdullah likes to quote, use quotes from people, Ben Gurion in the 1920s, people from before that, people from after that. But let's talk about the reality of where we are today. And where we are today is a nation state of Israel, the Jewish nation state of the people of Israel, of the Jews, that isn't going anywhere. Now, Israel is a democracy. There's absolutely no denying that. 82% of Israeli Arabs in a poll a few years ago said they wanted to remain as citizens of the Jewish state. I know that Israel is a democracy because 20 years ago, my father had a heart attack and a stroke on holiday in Tiberias, and his life was saved by an Arab doctor. So when we talk about the rights of, what was the question again? The rights of identities and
The historical presence of civilization.
historical presence of civilization. We've established the historical presence of Jews in the land of Israel going back millennia, the only people that have had an unbroken presence in that land. And you know what? I've been to the West Bank, I've met Palestinian families who've lived there for 400, 500 years, and they absolutely have a right to live in that land as well. I absolutely say that categorically. I believe that that should be done with two states living side by side, each people with its own nationality, each people with its own customs, each people with its own language. Democracies, absolutely, which is actually something you don't get in the Palestinian Authority today, and you certainly don't get in Gaza. And I think that that is how the way the region should look and how the Middle East should look and how certainly Israel and the Palestinians should deal with peace. Two states living side by side. Abdullah still hasn't said categorically he believes the Palestinians should have a state of their own, with their own symbols, with their own flag, with their own history embedded into their culture. He won't say that because he doesn't believe it. He believes in a caliphate. And it's all very well for him to say, yeah, the Jews were tolerated. You know, to use a Hebrew word, shkoyach, well done. Right? Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll answer that question directly. I'm only for consistency. If you believe in the caliphate or you want to implement that, fine. But if you don't believe in, you believe in nationalism, then be consistent. That's all I'm asking for. You pick which one you want, and you be consistent. If you believe in self-determination, then it's for everybody, not just for Jews, not just for whatever. It's for everybody. That's it. But you're not being consistent. I keep asking you: do Palestinians have the right of return to everywhere they lived, as Israel enforces? Jews are returned back to where they live, or it's given back to their heirs and descendants, which is the state policy now in Israel. Then will that be equally extended to Palestinians? Equally. Always silence. Silence. All right, let me finish. You can respond, don't worry. All right? Secondly, there is, yes, one group of people that have an unbroken connection to that land. It's Palestinians, including Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Samaritans. They are the inhabitants. But just because you've got a Palestinian Jew, Samaritan, or Christian, or what have you, somewhere in one part in Palestine, doesn't mean now that a German Christian or a British Jew can say, well, that's my people there, right? That's overstretch. European Jews have been separated from the land for 2,000 years plus, right? So that's not, so don't say that you have an unbroken connection, because clearly it was broken enough that it's 2,000 years. Technically, they could have gone back at any point in time after the Romans anyway. Why only now with the British, right? Second, I'll leave one other point, which is, today the Likud party says from the river to the sea, it will only be Israeli sovereignty. That's on their manifesto. There is no two-state solution. They killed it. It's dead. What's left? They killed it. What's left? Only one state. Only the same solution that worked in South Africa. That's because the representative government of the state of Israel has decided it's going to be the only thing that's left, is equal rights for everyone. And the fact that you don't want that is highly telling as your ethnic supremacist mindset, unfortunately.
Right. We've got one question left, and this is addressed to you, Abdullah. How can we achieve a lasting peace?
Okay. Quite simply, justice. Have you ever seen people, when given justice, still want to fight? No. Generally speaking, no. Justice is what is the only solution to this. But that's what Zionism opposes, because Zionism requires a Jewish nation state with a democracy. That means that demographics are important. That means that they have to deny the demographics of the Palestinians and deny their equal rights. Simple as that. That's the problem there. That's the stumbling block. That's the obstacle. That's why many Jews are opposing this. And by the way, according to a poll, recent poll, 1/3 of British Jews do not identify as Zionists. A whole third of them. And it's increasing with every, it's increasing. This is an impartial poll, not done by the Palestinians or Hamas, right? Okay, I'll cite it in the next round, don't worry. So basically, the point is this. He's not going to answer, do Palestinians have an equal right to return to their ancestral places where they lived within only a generational memory? He was not going to answer that question. I'm going to answer that question. I think everyone should have a right to return to wherever their ancestry was, if they even have a connection to it, or even if they have a loose connection to it, or maybe even if they're a convert, they can just go. I'm okay with that. The problem is, he's not okay with equal human beings simply being given equal rights, because that goes against his ethno-nationalist ideology, and that's unfortunately the stumbling block to peace today. Okay, I'll make my extra point. All right, so I'll make a slight point, an additional point. Now, the thing is this. The Hamas Charter of 1988, he referenced it. I always like to obviously check sources and obviously go through claims. What isn't really mentioned is Article 31 in this, which is, it says, now, yes, Hamas does believe that the land of Palestine should be under Islam as it was before. Yes, they say that, they're not ashamed of it. But sometimes Zionists on his side like to argue that Hamas wants to just kill all Jews, right? Just for the sake of it. Not because, okay, now, I don't support some of Hamas's tactics in the past, much like many of you. I hope do not support the Irgun, who their leader became the prime minister of the state of Israel. I hope that you don't support it. I hope, but I'll quote it. It says, under the wing of Islam, it is possible for the followers of the three religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, to coexist in peace and quiet with each other. Now, just for the sake of fact-checking, that doesn't sound to me like they are aiming to wipe out every Jew in the world, as he says. Otherwise, why would it be in their manifesto that Christians, Muslims, and Jews can coexist in peace and quiet with each other? Answer me that.
Under the wing of Islam. Need I say anything else? Now, but I will, because he talks about justice. And what he really means by justice is that to the Muslim Middle East, it is an injustice that there is a Jewish state with its own self-determination. So for him, justice means no Jewish state in the Middle East. And he's just said it by saying, under the wing of Islam. Yes, they'll tolerate us. Yes, you can live there. You can practice your religion. But don't think you can ever have an idea of your own statehood, of your own self-determination, of your own nationality. Absolutely not. Under the wing of Islam. And with regards to the Likud Charter, the Likud Charter was written in 1977, 10 years when the Six-Day War was in living memory. But it also says, the Likud government will place its aspirations for peace at the top of its priorities. For peace at the top of its priorities. And despite what it's written, the Likud party has never moved to annex the West Bank, and its leader in 2005 voluntarily left Gaza. Its leader as well, Menachem Begin, also gave the Sinai Desert back to Egypt. Benjamin Netanyahu was part of the Y River Accords that handed 9% of the West Bank to the Palestinians, extra 9% for self-rule. It's always been Likud prime ministers that have traded land for peace. So you can say all you want about the Likud, but actually it's been their prime ministers who have always traded land for peace. But let's finish and remember that one quote. Thank you so much. We can live under the wing of Islam. Thank you. That is so, so generous and says it all.
Okay. Right, so we've come to... Sorry. Could you please... Right, we've nearly come to the end now. Can I ask you to please stop interrupting, otherwise we may ask you to leave. I've said... Right. Okay, so we're moving on to the final remarks now. Each speaker will have 5 minutes, and we'll start with Rafi.
We've already established that Zionism, the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel with their own state, subservient to no one, not under the wing of Islam, is at the core of Judaism and was a desire Jews prayed for across millennia. The creation of the modern-day state of Israel was the realization of that yearning and fused Jewish religion and nationality together. Zionism was and is the liberation movement of the Jewish people. Was because it gave Jews a safe haven after experiencing both a genocide in Europe and an ethnic cleansing from Muslim states throughout the Middle East, and is because if not for the state of Israel now, its 8 million Jewish inhabitants would be slaughtered without a second thought. When Ghazi Hamad, a member of Hamas's political bureau, said on October the 24th, 2023, Israel is a country that has no place on our land. We must remove it because it constitutes a security, military, and political catastrophe to the Arab and Islamic nation. We are not ashamed to say this. We must teach Israel a lesson, and we will do it twice and 3 times. The Al-Aqsa deluge, that's the name Hamas gave the October the 7th massacre, is just the first time, and there will be a second and a third time. He meant it. When Khalid Mashal, another Hamas leader, said, October the 7th paved a wide highway towards the removal of Israel, towards liberation, and towards saving Jerusalem and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, he meant it. And just in case you think it's only Hamas, when Faisal al-Husseini, the so-called moderate minister for Jerusalem affairs in Yasser Arafat's Palestinian Authority, once said, what many still believe, that tactically we may win or lose, but our eyes will continue to aspire to the strategic goal, namely to Palestine from the river to the sea, that is, to a Palestine in place of Israel. He meant it. And if you need any more proof that this is really what they want, consider this. It's not settlements or occupation that is responsible for there being no peace. The Arabs of the land, the Palestinians, have only ever dealt in absolutism. They have had, time and time again, an opportunity for a state of their own. They could have had it in around 75% of the land in 1937 and just under half of the land in 1947. In 1948, just 3 years after the Jews experienced the genocide of the Holocaust, the Arabs launched their own genocidal war against the Jews and the newly established Jewish state of Israel, aiming to destroy it. The Jews defended themselves, fought back, and won. And when the Palestinians were offered the vast majority of the West Bank in Gaza in 2000 by Ehud Barak and 2008 by Ehud Olmert, they again said no. In 2005, Israel completely withdrew from Gaza. It could have been a Singapore of the Middle East, but it became a terror state. Every time the Palestinians were told, you can be masters of your fate in part of the land, but in another part, the Jews will be masters of their fate, no longer inferior to you, no longer ruled by you, no longer tolerated by you. Their choice for over 80 years to the present has been to fight for all. The Palestinians have always said, if we must live next to sovereign Jews, better to fight until they are not there at all. And we saw this live streamed by Hamas terrorists on October the 7th as they roamed around southern Israel screaming with joy that they were killing Jews, not Israelis, killing Jews with their bare hands. This is how the anti-Zionism of Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, many in the Palestinian Authority, and millions of others across the Middle East would violently manifest itself if given the chance. The murder and genocide of all the Jews living in the modern-day Jewish state of Israel and its destruction. And they are supported in this genocidal aim by all those other people around the world who agree with them that Israel has no right to exist, smear it with modern versions of age-old anti-Semitic blood libels, and demand that it is consigned to the dustbin of history. These people do not call for the destruction of any other state in the world. These same people target those who identify as Zionists, effectively meaning Jews, and I should know I'm a Jew, since the vast majority of global Jewry proudly identify as Zionists, with abuse, discrimination, racism, and physical attacks on our streets, in our workplaces, at synagogues, at Jewish schools, at hospitals when we go for treatments, and online, simply because we believe in Jewish self-determination.
20 seconds left.
If it's not really Jew hate, why do they use slogans like, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and stop doing what Hitler did to you alongside pictures of Jesus on the cross, which say, Palestinians, do not let them do the same thing again, and chants of Chayba Chayba al Yahud, an ancient battle cry that references the massacre of Jews by an Arab army, because it's age-old classic Jew hate. In the Middle Ages, Jews were hated for their religion. In the 19th and early 20th century, they hated because they were rich and because they were poor, because they were capitalists and because they were communists, because they kept to themselves and because they infiltrated everywhere. Stalin thought Jews were rootless cosmopolitans who believed nothing. Hitler hated Jews because he thought they were parasitic vermin worthy of eradication, much like all those people I mentioned before. Before the Second World War, Jews were told to go to Palestine. Now they're told to get out of Palestine. Today, Jews are hated for their nation state. There are 15 countries of the United Nations who define themselves as Christian states, and 157 countries in total in which a majority of the population is Christian, and 57 members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The idea that Jews, having one country of their own, is one too many, and that the Jewish state of Israel should be destroyed and the Middle East be Judenrein, the ethnic cleansing of Jews by Hamas and Hezbollah and everybody else, that's what makes anti-Semitism the new form, anti-Zionism the new form of anti-Semitism.
Since he spoke over his time, I was told I was be given an extra minute, like he was given an extra minute, so that's fine. I'll use that for some fact-checking. I promised I would give you a reference, and so here's the reference you'd like, if you'd like. The Religion Media Center conducted a poll this year, February the 8th, 2024, and here's one of the results. So most of the British Jewish community, the 5th largest in the world, expressed an affiliation with Israel. However, the study found that there had been a fall in those identifying as Zionist from 72% a decade ago to 63%. So there you go. There's the poll. All right. Now, one of the things is we all should be concerned with combating anti-Semitism, and really we need to combat it. We need to combat it at its roots. A lot of anti-Semitism stems from the supremacist viewpoint of the Western civilization against those in the Middle East. That was original anti-Semitism, at least in the term was given to coin to that. But also, there is an anti-Semitism that arises because Zionists, like my colleague here, keep associating Zionism with Judaism, and then argues that all the injustices that Zionism requires is really required by Judaism. And that is anti-Semitic. That's what makes many people, unfortunately, they believe that rhetoric, and then they follow it through, regrettably. And we need to combat that. I'm actually in the forefront of combating anti-Semitism by saying that's not true. It's not Jewish to oppress. It is not Jewish to oppress. Right? Call me anti-Semite for saying that. I'll accept it, but it's not. He says, he cites a few things. I'm going to try to jump and try to cover a few things as best as I can. He still hasn't proven that it is an obligation in Judaism, it is required in Judaism, that Jews must be the sole sovereigns of the land of Palestine. Or the Israelites. I mean, don't the Samaritans count? I suppose they're the other Israelites. But But they, well, according to the Israeli government, they actually are Jews. That's why they're given aliyah, right of return, and they're giving Israeli citizenship, and they're also giving Palestinian citizenship too. Now, when he says, again, notice how he refuses to answer my question, do Palestinians have the equal right to return to their ancestral land, to their ancestral homes, of which they have a much shorter connection to, as Jews do, even if Jews are just converts to Judaism? He hasn't answered it. Have you noticed that? And then he answers that the reason I'm only supporting unitary state is because I want to see the Jews wiped out or massacred or so on. The same rhetoric that South African apartheid advocates and the government said. Check it for yourself, please. I literally quoted you their manifesto. It said it would be national suicide to do it. And he said the same thing. Does that not sound similar to you? Sounds pretty similar to me, eerily similar. He still hasn't answered the question, is Einstein an anti-Semite for saying that because the Palestinian Arabs are the majority, you can't establish a Jewish ethno-state up over them? He still hasn't answered that. He talks about October the 7th, because you can't have a debate these days without October 7th being brought up. And he argues, and I suppose the implication is that Palestinians shouldn't be having any self-determination, or they can't trust them with having their own state, or to have a unitary state because of the actions done by some criminal elements during October the 7th. And yet, wait, you have to... Were they not criminals? Do you think, or do you not think they're criminals? Okay, well, let's talk about other terrorists then, like the person who said, and in my present opening statement, he said that he was commanded to make an attack upon an Arab village, an example to everyone, and that he was ordered for maximal killing and damage to property. Do you know who that was? He killed 69 civilians. Do you know what that was? Ariel Sharon in his own diary. Yeah. If an organization that can do that means it does not have a right to exist, by your logic, then surely the army of the state of Israel, and Israel by connection, does not have a right to exist because of the atrocities it has committed and has ordered to be committed, using your own logic. So if Hamas should be destroyed because it committed atrocities, and every organization then in the world that commits atrocities should be destroyed by that logic, then it must equally apply to your own so-called state that you support. He talks about, use some German words there. What was it? Blood libel and what else? Was it Judenrein, yeah, the argument. Even though despite the fact that the settlements in the West Bank are Palestinian Rhine. You can't go in there without a permit in your own country. But I'll use another land, if you like German words, I've got a word for you, Lebensraum. That the Israeli state viewed West Bank as its breathing space, as its space for it says it's for its own security. It was a German term used to justify the, ironically, also eastward expansion of Germany for its own security against Russia and for to be a viable state for the German people, right? So this is an ironic argument. I want to bring up German words. We can bring up German words. I'm going to go back to good old Abba Egan. I started with him. We're going to end with him. Okay, wait. Abba Egan, he said anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and yet he also said that this requires denying self-determination to the Palestinians. There is enough evidence for you to show that anti-Zionism should be supported by anyone that is a person of conscience. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both our speakers. Thanks everyone for sticking around. I'm really glad this was able to go ahead. I hope you feel you've got something out of it. As Duncan said at the beginning, it's about understanding different people's point of view. So hopefully you're glad you stuck around till the end. Thanks to the university for hosting it, and All that's left for me to do is wish you a safe journey home. Thanks a lot.